Great to have you join us for End Time Prophecy. I'm Pastor Doug, and every Tuesday and Thursday we meet for a few moments to discuss a major biblical topic on prophecy that's being fulfilled right before our eyes in the days and time we're living. And today's topic is, we're there, we've arrived. Are you interested? I hope so. And what I mean by we're there, we arrived, I'm going to share with you when the disciples came to Jesus and said, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? And that true story is told in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I'll pretty much stick with Luke so we don't bounce all over the place, but give you the insights, how Jesus answered that question. It's so important that we know the times we're living in today, that we will not be caught off guard like a thief in the night. We may not know the day or the hour of the Lord's coming, whether that's in the air or back to Mount of Olives after the rapture. We can know when Jesus said the clouds move in, one can know it's going to rain, they can predict it's going to rain. So too, you know the time is near when these prophecies begin to be fulfilled. And in these three settings, when they asked Jesus, what shall be the sign of that coming and of the end of the world? Jesus started answering that question, Matthew 21, 7 through 11. But in verse 12, after he already told the disciples and us today, there's going to be pestilence, which is not a foreign pet. It means like a virus. There will be famines, earthquakes, etc. He's answering those questions. And then he stops. And of course, it was a one long story narrative. But in verse 12, as we have chapters and verses now, in verse 12, it says, but before all these things, before the earthquakes, before the famines, etc., before these things, before they happen, then he looks at the disciples and tells those in the first century. He says basically, Jerusalem's going to be ran over by the Gentiles and taken over. There are going to be people killed. There's going to be a lot of persecution. It's going to be a rough time. The temple will be destroyed, not one stone on top of the other. He lays this out when he said before all these things, he told them there's going to be some rough times coming. Then after he does that, he gets back to answering the disciples' questions about the end of the time and his return. But when Jesus gets down to verse 24, he says, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword. That's those in the first century. And shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down to the Gentiles. That has been fulfilled. When he told them, watch out, persecution, etc., that happened. But the last phrase of verse 24 is until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And that happened in 1948. 1948, the times of the Gentiles were over. 70 AD, Rome came in with General Titus and just destroyed Jerusalem. And people ran for their life. From 70 AD, when the Gentiles took over, till 1948, the nation of Israel, that area is run by the Gentiles. But in 1948, that prophecy in Luke 21:24 was fulfilled. When Israel got their land back. You tell me of a nation, 2,000 years later, the same race of people go back into the land. They speak the same language. They pick the same capital, Jerusalem. It's just amazing. You won't find any other nation in the world that's happened to. But the prophecy was fulfilled, and today the Jewish people have their land back. They're going to get more, and also Jerusalem will be divided in the upcoming wars. But this prophecy is fulfilled at the times of the Gentiles. And the unique thing is how it happened. It happened in 1948 when the United Nations gave their okay and approval that the land would go back to the Jews. At that point, England ran the Holy Land. And because of James Wiseman, the scientist who helped Winston Churchill and England to come up with another form of gunpowder to hold them off till America and Russia and nations got involved to really help England out. But England was so touched by what James Wiseman, the scientist, did. They asked what they could do to repay him. He said, would you give my people back that Holy Land that you're running? And of course, they went to the United Nations, and it happened May 14, 1948. The times of the Gentiles was up. And that's so important because after that situation, they did not own Jerusalem. They got the land back, but if you would fly into Jerusalem, you couldn't do that for almost 2,000 years. But if you go to Jerusalem up until 1967, you'd be in a Gentile country called Jordan. Six-Day War in 67, they defeated 3 Gentile nations, and they got Jerusalem back. In 1973, they moved the capital there. And I think it was 2018, President Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital. And so other nations started recognizing that too, but it was a done deal. So they get their land back, the same people. These prophecies have been fulfilled. And you might say, well, what's this significance and so important? Well, let me keep looking at Luke 7 here, or Luke 21. It says, verse 28, now when these things begin to happen, the earthquakes, the sea, the roarings of the sea, tsunamis, the pestilence, all these things start like birth pains. The birth pains keep coming faster. Look up and lift your heads because your redemption draws nigh, draws near. And now in Luke 21:32, you've really got to see this. This is beautiful. Luke 21 verse 32. Jesus says, assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all things take place. Now, if you look in the context, Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, at this setting, you'll notice that when the times of the Gentiles were up and these other prophecies began to be fulfilled, big ones like the nation that was not, with the same race of people, get their land back. Then 19 years later, 67, they get their city back and make it capital in 73. Jesus says right there in Luke 21:32, assuredly, I say to you, this generation, the generation that sees these things happen, will by no means completely pass away till all things take place. Jesus is saying there's still going to be people alive. When Israel becomes a nation and Jerusalem becomes their capital, becomes part of Israel, there are going to be people still alive in that generation when these things happen. And that's going to include some of us that's watching this video now. It's going to include some of us. Not that whole generation is going to die off. Of course, the real question is, what is a generation? Well, I've looked at it in several areas. Some say it's 30 years. Some say 40. Ecclesiastes says one generation passes away and another one comes. Then the Bible, I think it's Psalms 90, said we'll live to be 70 due to strength 80. And the average age of an American right now, at least this nation, is about 75.4, something like that. So it's right on target what God said. But I can't give you the exact understanding of what a generation is, but I'm telling you, we're there. And if it's 75 years, just do the math. I wouldn't say 48 because they did not have Jerusalem back. It was definitely the prophecy that they'd have Jerusalem back. That was in 67. Now we also must realize God knows the timetable of the month, years, dates, time change, and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just telling you, we're knocking at the door. We're close. We've arrived. We have arrived. We don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know the day or time. We just know the clouds have come in and it's upon us. This has never been true up until the World War II in 1948. People all the time could have said, well, we're in the end times, this is going to happen. It couldn't have happened because there was no nation of Israel from the times of Jesus in the first century until 1967 when they got Jerusalem back. It couldn't have happened. I know years ago they were prophesying this has happened, that's happened. And well-meaning people, remember when you make a mistake, make it from your head, not your heart. God will keep working with us. But when you spitefully do things from your heart to be deceitful, that's when God will not keep working with you. So this wasn't going to take place until Israel became a nation and Jerusalem became the capital of Israel. That happened in 1967, and Jesus said, I surely tell you, this generation will not completely pass away till all things are fulfilled. So we've arrived. The time's fulfilled of the Gentiles. The Jewish people have their land back. Now we're at the doorstep. And I will stop there until I pick up next time. Let me just ask, would you be so kind to hit like and subscribe? The button's below. It only costs you a second of time. That's it. And it'll help us to remind you of our next episode. And you'll be able to reach, well, if you help us out, it'll be able to reach more people in advancing God's kingdom with the truth of prophecy and the end of times. Well, thank you for joining us here at End Time Prophecy. And until next time, May you find grace in deep waters that you may be facing. May you find wisdom at every fork in the road that you come to. May you find strength to walk in your God-given path in your daily life. And may you arrive in the joy of many mountaintops. Remember, God loves you, and so do we. Until next time, here at End Time Prophecy.